Mama? Min? You have to come and get me. I can't bear it. I can't come and get you. It's the middle of the night. Of course you can. Just get in the car. I'm down the road. Please, Mum, please. Darling, you'll get used to it. I don't want to get used to feeling awful. You wanted to do this. Yes, but I got it wrong. Well, it'd be no fun for you here. You know that. I don't care about fun. I just want... The phone starts beeping, needing more money that I don't have. Please, just come. But she's gone. Small feet on stone, cold stone, hot tears, as I drag myself back to the dormitory, through the dark hallways, hoping a night monster will get me, and then they'll be sorry. I lie in bed and think about running away. But where to? It's a strange feeling to know that while I can make an escape, my destinations have one by one ceased to be places of sanctuary. So that's from the book by Minnie Driver, Managing Expectations. And she went to boarding school, I believe it was at age 8. And so she talks about running away. So today I wanted to talk about captivity, about is boarding school a prison? And I know that's quite a big word, and there's a reason for it. Is, you know, I've been looking through these biographies. I've got 10 books there, and most of them, well, all of them either say a word that's associated with prisons, or they talk about running away and then being brought back, meaning there's no escape. And these range from Clive Woodward to Stephen Fry to Roald Dahl, John Peel. And so I just thought, as I've unpicked this, it's amazing they all use the word prisoner, inmate, and I'm just going to go through and share a bit about that today. Okay. So let me begin. So for me, Joyce Shavarian, she talks about in her book Boarding School Syndrome about the ABCD of boarding school syndrome. The C is the captivity. I know I've done other videos about this. This is slightly different today. She says, whilst some children enjoy their school, for those who are mistreated or abused, boarding school can be experienced as a form of captivity. In her work on trauma, Judith Herman describes common experiences of trauma in which the person is held against his or her will and subjected to the will of the other. Herman writes that whether this is the result of war or of domestic violence, the effect on the victim is similar. The child who is trapped in a boarding school with a ruthless regime is similarly captive. Held against his will and subject to the will of others, the child is powerless. And I want to share some stories from these different biographies. We've obviously got Minnie Driver there. There's also this book here, Christine Jack's brilliant book. And she says, so she was at boarding school, I believe, from 8 or 9. She says, I had been captive in various schools for almost 8 years, being subjected to what Irving Goffman calls total institutions. The characteristics of these institutions are that all aspects of life are conducted in the same place and under the same single authority, with requirements to do the same things together. Daily activities are tightly scheduled and controlled by explicit formal rules, which are based on a single rational plan purportedly designed to fulfill the official aims of the institution. Conformity in actions is what is required of the inmate, keeping hidden any questioning. Shavarian believes that children in boarding school go through a process similar to that of people who are subjected to total institutions. So for me, at my boarding school, been there a few days, maybe a few weeks, we started to have the stories come through of the people who tried to run away, to escape, and how they were all brought back by either the parents or the police, or they were found by the school. And so what I was learning very quickly was you didn't try to escape. There was no way out. When I was interviewing Gabor Mate last year, he asked me, he says, well, could you escape? Because that's the normal response, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. The flee is when it's difficult, you run away. But I said to him, well, no, you couldn't run away because you're in the middle of nowhere. That was one aspect, but the other was the stories to say, you do not run away because you will be brought back. So, I know prison is a strong word, but let me just kind of run through some of the books where they talk about. So we've got Inmates there from Christine Jack. This is John Peel's biography talking about his boarding school experience. And he says, of far greater significance to me than the staff, obviously, were my fellow inmates. The only other new boy that term and the only person outside my immediate family that I knew before my mid-20s with whom I am still in contact was Sparrow Harrison. So, inmates. Then we've got Bear Grylls. And Bear Grylls, what does he say? I remember all of us in our dormitory counting down the days like prisoners until the next exeat or weekend at home. Boy, they took a long time to come round, and man, then the glorious weekends would go past quickly. So that's Bear Grylls. Then we've got Stephen Fry, and I've used this quote before, but he says, I've said it before in interviews and it's taken as a witty joke, but life in prison was a breeze for me because at that point I had spent most of my life at boarding school. I didn't mean to suggest by that, as was supposed, that boarding schools are like prisons. I meant that prisons are like boarding schools. I knew, ironically, given my inability to do so in real boarding schools, how to survive. So that's, again, another one. And then Jeremy Paxman, finally, in his book, which I talked about last week. He says, for schools like Licky Hills, which was his prep school, to work their alchemy, there had to be a great disengagement from the outside world. Okay, I'll read that again. For schools like Licky Hills to work their alchemy, there had to be as great a disengagement from the outside world as possible. What do you expect of the parents? One of those paying the bills for this transformation asked my next headmaster. Pay the fees and stay away, he replied succinctly. Fathers generally seem to have understood this better than mothers. The son of a distinguished lawyer recalled how a particular low point, when he was gathering with his fellow inmates at the end of term, awaiting the arrival of his father to collect him for the holidays. He watched as his father strode into the room, grabbed another child, and dragged him protesting to the car, saying, "Oh, do come on, Stephen." It was only as he was about to drive off, and the small boy managed to attract his attention by exclaiming, "But sir, I'm not your son," that the father turned, and with a cry of, "Oh no, you're not," realised his mistake. So that's another person mentioning inmates. So I then kind of wanted to talk about this idea of escaping. So here we've got this total institution. Most people who I've got the biographies for, they mention that it's, either like a prison, they're inmates, they can't escape. Then, if I was reading Clive Woodward's book, who was the England manager for the England Rugby team that won the World Cup in 2003. And he went to a boarding school called HMS Conway, and he went from 13 to 18. And basically, the story is he wanted to play football, but was only allowed to play rugby. And he tried to keep playing football because he was good at it, but they didn't play football at this school. So as Goody recalls, Clive was thrashed and plummeted into unhappiness, and as a consequence ran away from school. For my part, I was told in no uncertain terms to end this nonsense. Clive ran away again later, but eventually succumbed to the tradition of the ship, rugby football. In fact, Clive ran away from school 3 times in total. On every occasion, his father would meet him at the front door and frog march him back to the station. And so, yeah, that's really fascinating. I won't go into this in here, but Roald Dahl also talks about a friend who runs away, who he really likes, but he, he gets brought back. It's called Denton Welsh. He must have had more courage than me, or possibly less tolerance, because he refused to put up with it all. One day he escaped and ran away and never came back. And then the final story about running away is Tony Blair. And Tony Blair, he ran away, and this was quite public because it was on the Donahue show in the 18th of December 1996. Donahue, it's Des O'Connor. When his parents put him on the train at Newcastle station to go to school, Blair walked through the carriages and got off again at the other end of the platform. The 14-year-old Blair then made his way to Newcastle Airport and said he managed to get on a plane to somewhere like the Bahamas before being asked for his boarding pass. The airport authorities then telephoned the headmaster of Fetis, who telephoned his parents. When he first told this story publicly in a television interview with Des O'Connor, journalists were delighted to discover that there'd never been any flights to the Bahamas from Newcastle, although anyone flying to the Bahamas would get a plane to London first. They also telephoned Leo, his father, who scoffed at the idea that his son had actually boarded a plane. Tony then contradicted him in the press. I did actually get on the plane, and I was taken off by the stewardess. I think Dad was trying to help because he thought I had done something terrible. So it's just interesting that here we have people, and the final example, Jack Whitehall, talking. It was his father who was sharing, talking about sending him to dragon school. And his last words in the chapter, this is Michael Whitehall saying, "Would I have agreed to let him leave if he hadn't liked it there? What do you think?" And Jack Whitehall writes underneath, "No." So he was trapped. So it's this thing of, we are in this total institution and we might ask for help. Again, Charles Spencer, he talks about this boy who writes home consistently saying, "Please take me out, please take me out." And years later, he's told by his parents that if he'd written one more letter, he would have been taken away. And so this idea really of, is boarding school a prison? Again, listening to people's literature, it's like it was very difficult to leave it. In fact, as I look back, the only ways you could leave boarding school, I think there was three main ways. One was a body bag. One of my friends, as you know, committed suicide. There was another lady I've since heard committed suicide. The other way is expulsion. And the final way was, if it got so bad that you had a mental breakdown, or you just couldn't, I know one boy who'd been there 6 years, got so bad, he had a ladder smashed through his window, and he was just bullied all the time. He eventually left. So I think it's very difficult to escape. Very difficult to escape. So I think that, it's quite a long one today, but it feels such a deep subject, this one, about is it a prison? We can't escape, and the more I look, and I haven't looked at all of my biographies, I've got more back there, I'm sure there's more stories which are similar. And it's like a recurring theme, and I often get that in books. If someone says inmate again, or someone says, "Oh, I ran away." And, just for us to notice that if we went to boarding school and you're watching this, it's like the impact of that. Maybe there's some grief there. I cried when I read Minnie Driver's story. It's heartbreaking. She was 8, 9, it's trapped. So just noticing, maybe there's some grief there for us to process and work through. But yeah, And then to see that, you know, the final aspect, going on for a long time today, is noticing if our leaders have been through these institutions where they have been held captive, they have been imprisoned, how might that play out in their decision making? You know, I think of lockdowns, I think of the control that's on us. Could that have anything to do with the trauma of our leaders? So it's just a question there to look at, and how it might impact others. So thank you so much for listening. Any questions, or, you know, any reflections? Maybe you were at school, boarding school, and you were like, oh yeah, I definitely got that sense I couldn't escape. Or maybe someone else ran away, got brought back. You know, please do share your stories. I think the stories help us to heal, realize we're not alone. Okay, thank you for listening. Take care.